Welcome to everybody. It's lovely to see everyone today. My name is Alison Pello. I am the business owner of People Vision. We are 20 years in business now. We've been doing HR training, mental health training, all sorts of bits and pieces. So that's what we've been doing today. We've got lots of people from lots of different places. I'm going to just do this, and we're sharing screens and things today. So we are going to be just bear with me. We're going to be talking about, this is our 11th webinar that we've done. Consistently, 11 o'clock on Wednesdays, we'll be delivering these webinars, complimentary webinars for you all. Just one thing we do ask is that maybe if a couple of people mind staying behind to do us a testimonial, we would really appreciate it. It's just on the video, nothing complex. Don't worry. We don't expect you to be Susan Sarandon or Julia Roberts or anything, but it would be lovely if we could just get a little testimonial. So here we are talking about difficult discussions today, and we would be looking for your feedback. You could do that also on a review through Google. And these are some of the other events we've actually been working on the events right through till December now. I started to work on that last night, and some of the speakers of the other events are on the call today. I just saw Sian there. Hello, Sian. We are going to be doing how to carry out a mental health audit for returning employees and building resilience in challenging times. And then all of these events that we're doing over this next year, we believe are a part of our kind of roadmap. Not just Boris that has a roadmap. We also have a roadmap for being back to business. And we think these are the elements, and we cover three main areas, which is HR, training and mental health. So about R for remembering personal development, offering mental health support, adapting to change, developing excellent management, managing working patterns, always communicate, and perfect your health and safety. So those are some of the things. I'm going to just, if you start to speak, Emma, I'm going to hand over to Emma, who's going to actually introduce herself. I'm going to try and make you spotlight, Emma. So
thank you.
Go for it.
I'm not sure I want a spotlight on me, but there we go. That's absolutely fine. But thank you, Alison, and lovely to see so many people on the call today. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening from me to everyone and wherever you are. I'm currently sat in sunny old Windsor. You'll see behind me I have a beautiful view of the river, which cannot be too bad, frankly, for a Wednesday. My name is Emma Locke, as you all will know. I am the HR manager here at a company called Perfetti Van Mel. Many people, when I say that, go, what? But actually what we do here are things like Chupa Chups, we do Smint, we do Mentos, and we do Frutella. So there's some brands that you possibly will know. I'm currently sat, and in front of me there is a whole host of sweeties. I was sharing with Alison earlier on that there's a number of sweeties here that I'm constantly surrounded by. It's a very difficult thing to resist on a daily basis, but I have managed today only to eat one very tiny pack of Mentos, so I'm doing particularly well, bearing in mind it's just gone 11 o'clock. I have had a career in HR for the last, nearly 20 years. Let's not talk about that too much. I've always done HR. I've worked for BP previously. I was an HR business partner there. I was there for 8 whole years. I also did an internal investigations role, which was fascinating and has certainly helped I guess my experience and frame the conversation that we're going to have today. I also worked at Vodafone for a short stint and worked across their London and Düsseldorf office, and then I've worked for other places that are a little bit different. I started my career actually at Broadmoor Hospital, and for those of you who are aware of that, that's a high security mental health hospital, and that was where I first sort of fell into HR. And then I've worked for other places like Phones International, which is owned by the very tall gentleman on Dragon's Den. If any of you watch the BBC programme, the very tall chap on the right of the Dragons. Peter Jones was my boss's boss, and I used to head up all of his HR function. So I've had a fairly interesting career. I'm hoping that today will be of interest to you, and I'm really pleased that lots of people have joined. We've got about a session time of 45 minutes, I think, so Alison will obviously tell me to hurry up if needed, if I keep going.
You're doing well.
Yeah, absolutely. We'd obviously ask you to use the chat function, obviously put up any questions, and we can deal with those at the end. We are recording, as you would have heard. I think my computer, probably like everybody else, has just popped up with a little button, so hopefully everyone's okay with that. Part of me doesn't want to listen to this recording, obviously, because I will hear my own voice, which is always the worst thing in the world. But obviously we'd also ask you just to mute yourself, so that there isn't any background noise. And again, for me, this is probably a top tip when doing some difficult conversations in terms of just managing some of the audio around you. So hopefully that is helpful today. So moving on.
Yeah, I'm trying. I'm doing it.
Alison's very kindly driving for me, because I was like, both of them. So really what we'd love to do today, what we hope that you will take away from this session, is that if you need to inform employees, well, anybody else, in fact, you can take this into your personal life as well. But if you need to inform employees about changes or difficulties or very difficult conversations, you can do that, but do that in a very professional and a compassionate manner. We also want you to think about and learn and kind of be aware of how you can do that with sincerity and emotion, even via a screen. And hopefully, you'll be able to watch some of this in action today. We also want you to feel that you're able to allow all parties to communicate effectively and all parties to be heard. And again, despite the screen, we want to allow you and sort of give you some ideas about how you can do that. And we really want you to leave today feeling, better prepared to deal with any difficult conversations that may come your way. And as probably the majority of you, I'm guessing, are sort of HR professionals, you won't be unused to these anyway. But we want to really help you, have a bit of an extra sort of tool in your belt. Oh, sorry, I think a bit of feedback there. This may not be on mute. If you could pop this off mute, that would be fabulous. So we know it's tricky to talk. During all of our careers here, we've had to have difficult conversations, whether that's you as the HR professional, whether that's you as a line manager, whether it's peer-to-peer conversations, they're equally not very easy. And whether those conversations are about things like redundancies, dismissals, reorganisations, performance management, bereavement, there's a whole host of things that really come across our desks as HR professionals. It's hard enough doing that face to face. It's really difficult to do that when somebody's in the room. But actually, when we're having to do this across a screen, it's making things much more complex. And I think we have obviously seen over the last sort of 15 months that the world of work has massively changed, but we've been very used to being in an office, and now we've spent a long time behind our screens and dialing into calls. And I think even going forward, we've all been grounded by Boris here in the UK for another few weeks. I expect that we will see many organisations are still going to be employing the working from home sort of pattern and scenario, because many people will still not want to come back to the office full time. So just moving on. Just wanted a very quick, feel free to come off mute temporarily or put something in the chat. What are the challenging experiences that you here on the call have had when you're doing something virtually? And I will start by sharing something if that's helpful. And two of them have been fascinating. I had a colleague during a redundancy meeting. Their line manager was explaining that they were going to be made redundant, and the line manager had their dog on their lap whilst explaining to this person that they were being made redundant. I've also had a conversation in a team meeting. It wasn't necessarily a difficult conversation, but it wasn't an easy conversation, where a colleague based in another country lit up a cigarette and started smoking a full proper cigarette. And I have to say that was a bit of a distractor, rather personally. So that for me were two examples that I am sort of surprised I've ever had to, I don't expect people to bring their dogs into work necessarily, particularly, I work for a food industry, and I certainly don't expect people to start smoking cigarettes here in the UK. So anything else? So I've seen that there was sort of disciplinaries, they're quite difficult to do virtually, absolutely. Has anybody got any horror stories or anything, any examples that they are able to share confidentially today that they would sort of can raise our eyebrows today?
People not putting cameras on for these important conversations makes it really hard to gauge if they're paying attention. Yeah,
absolutely. And I think saying I'm having a bad hair day today is a difficult justification for not coming on camera. I have done mine today, by the way. Just to
Yeah, I think. Well, I've had to appoint some people, so I've recruited people based on all virtual. Couldn't meet them, had no concept. They basically have authority to dial it. I mean, I'm a small business, and they can authority to dial into my whole world and life through MS Teams and know everything. Not in my bank account, but quite a lot of stuff. Yeah, I have never even shaken their hand. So I think that's really fun. I mean, that's interesting about smoking, because probably, I had a conversation with somebody and they were smoking on the call, and I just thought, and I've seen vaping. I mean, is there a company policy on that? What do you all think, everybody? Lady Carol says, I had a lady opening a delivery of cheeses and eating in front of me. Yeah. So, I mean, has anyone got any thoughts about, pop it, either take yourself off mute or pop it in the chat box about, I mean, has anyone had any conversations with the staff with your staff groups about how these things should happen?
My American boss has made it very clear to everyone that when we return to work, that if you have your dog on your lap, she's a huge dog lover, she's dogs everywhere. It may have been cute during lockdown and having your baby in your arm, but actually when we get back into the workplace, that's just not acceptable. She's just been very blunt about it to us.
What sort of sector are you in, Sandra?
Education.
But they wouldn't be taking the dogs. So do you mean, because are you saying they're coming back into the world of work? Is that what's happening?
Yeah, but then we're going to have a hybrid situation. So some people will be in the office 2 or 3 days a week and then at home. So what she's saying is, we understand, and we made exceptions for people that were trying to juggle parenting and dogs and all of these things. And, if a child kind of crawled into vision or a dog jumps on your lap, everyone laughs and thought it was really cute. So going forward, you need to get yourself into proper work, formal situation, and those things shouldn't be happening. She's made it quite clear, her stance on that.
Yeah. Anyone else? Thank you, Sandra.
I was going to say, I've got an example. I did a disciplinary in my previous role, and the guy had, because of the nature of the business that I used to work in, he actually had all of his IT access removed, so he didn't have his work laptop. And we were doing the disciplinary virtually over Teams. And what had to happen is he refused to have any kind of like iPad or laptop dropped off for him to be able to sign into the Teams call. So he rang his manager on the phone, who I was then on Teams with. So I couldn't see him, couldn't really gauge if he could actually hear me or understand what I was saying. And the sort of nature of the disciplinary, he was dismissed, but he then turned around and said, well, he didn't hear anything, he didn't know what was going on, he didn't understand any of the questions, and it was just really, really difficult to communicate with him. Like, couldn't even see him. He claimed he couldn't hear me properly, but I could hear him, and it was just really, really hard.
And what sort of job does he do, or did he do?
He was a call center operator, so he was just on the telephone, sort of business to business energy selling.
Right.
So but yeah, it was a bit of a nightmare, to be honest.
It's difficult, isn't it? And I think in those circumstances, as the HR sort of lead, you sort of need to document all of the refusals that person's, given you for technology and the support, and it's very challenging. And I'm sure you did an amazing job during, what is a very difficult situation anyway. And then you've got that challenge. And I think people do use sometimes, the technology and the sort of distance as a barrier in many ways. And we all know in a disciplinary, people will choose any which way to try to get out out of a difficult situation that they're in. I'm sure you did an amazing job. Is there any sort of reflections in terms of how you would handle that if you were sort of faced with that again?
I think, to be honest, I'd probably make a formal request to have it in the office, particularly because all the calls were recorded, so every call they make is recorded, and he was heard on the phone saying that he was, well, I think the exact words were, "Can you shut up, man, I'm smoking a joint." So there was obviously drug use whilst he was on the phone, and I'm trying to play him this recording and he's claiming he can't hear it. So I think, to be honest, in future, if I was presented with something like that again, it would be a case of, let's just come into the office. It's not really appropriate to do it virtually. It just didn't really work.
Yeah, understandably. Thank you. That's really helpful, and thank you for sharing that. And I think for all of us, absolutely, you know, there are a huge amount of challenges that perhaps we just hadn't encountered before, and you know, and we are experiencing this, and a lot of us are having to learn very quickly as we go through some of these experiences. So for us, what we have put together is sort of a framework for you, and hopefully this is helpful to take away. Sort of we've termed sort of steps to success. And these 5 are really about, you know, preparing your message, yourself, and the technology. And I would hugely stress personally that a lot of this is in the preparation. And I'm a big kind of prep fan. And if there's one thing that you can take away from today, then preparation is absolutely key. So step 2 would be really accepting that often the only option is it being a virtual call, because people are sort of stuck in different places and we haven't been able to get together. Step 3 is really about focusing on the conversation and the facts. Step 4 is about matching your tempo and listening actively to what's going on actually in the call. And then, you know, confidently closing is step 5, and then having, you know, the next steps planned. And we'll talk through all of these separately so you understand, you know, sort of what we're talking about. Now, many of you will have heard the old adage that, you know, fail to prepare, you prepare to fail. And I'm a big advocate of this. And I'm particularly a big advocate in this, having conducted investigation interviews several times and over the course of 4 years whilst I was at BP. And I always would sit before a meeting thinking, right, anything could happen, you know, let me think about what actually could happen in this meeting. And I had somebody at one point feign a heart attack. So I've had all sorts happen in meetings, and of course not actually being in the room is incredibly difficult. But what you want to do before going into any difficult conversation is spend some time thinking about actually, what do you need to say? What are the key messages that you need to get across to that individual? If you're talking about a redundancy, for example, have you got all of the steps and all the points that you need to cover? Have you got, you know, details around all of the change that you need to cover? If, for example, there is reorganisation. I'm really sorry, if somebody's not on mute, would you mind just putting yourself on mute? Thank you ever so much. Yeah, and if, for example, you're talking about a dismissal, you just need to be really clear that you've covered all the steps. Personally, I find it quite useful to write out things, and anybody that knows me will laugh because there's a set of notes in front of me, because that's how I work. Personally, I prefer to write things down. Typing doesn't really kind of get into my brain quite so easily, but I'd be saying, write your messages down, your key points, type them up, whatever you feel is appropriate. Make some cue cards, use whatever things that you feel are helpful for you, just as pointers. And it's okay to have those in a meeting room. It's okay to say you've come prepared and that you've got those notes. You would do that in a face-to-face meeting if you were going into a redundancy or a disciplinary. You know, why would you not do that in a virtual meeting? The other piece I always feel is really helpful is just to talk with a buddy. Again, the jobs that we do are often confidential. It's difficult sometimes to share some of these messages, but I would always say, you know, find somebody that you can chat to, a peer or a colleague, that you can spend some time talking with them and relaying that message and actually hearing it out loud, what you would sound like if you were delivering this message online. And you can practice online. You can actually do it online. And that will allow you to hear yourself delivering those messages and get some feedback about actually how you come across to your audience. The other thing that you need to prepare is yourself. My top tip would be breathe. I have to say that I do get panicked if I'm delivering things sometimes, particularly if I know it's going to be a difficult person and a difficult conversation. I've had some fairly senior managers at BP that I have dealt with that I have felt a little bit intimidated by, because they are several pay grades above me. You know, they're human beings, but actually I'm in this job and oh my goodness, you know, are they going to be really tough with me? Actually just taking a little bit of time before the meeting to breathe and regulate your breathing before the meeting is really, really helpful. The other thing you need to prepare not only is yourself and your notes, but is things like the quiet space. Are you in a room somewhere that you can be left alone? And we know that this is a challenge when we're at home, for example. Maybe on a Thursday, if I'm at home, I can hear the bin men cluttering around, for example. You know, some of us have children, or we have pets, or, you know, we've got housemates, for example. So we can't always guarantee that they're going to be quiet, but often you sometimes have to say to those people that you're with, I really need some space. Now, I have been interviewed where a lady's little boy came in and wanted to ask about his homework, and I was obviously very polite, and she was very polite, and he came in and we dealt with that. But obviously, as things go forward, I think that will become less and less accepted. I'd be interested to see how it actually goes, but I feel that there will be a sense that we will have to get back to some sort of normal. Also, I think it's about, have you got the space on your desk clear? I think that's really important, making sure that you've actually set yourself up to be working appropriately, so actually your head is in the space of the meeting. You would do that with a face-to-face conversation. Why wouldn't you do that with a virtual one? And taking those distractions off your desk, I think, is really important and really, really critical. Please resist the urge to multitask. I know we sort of talked about the lady with the cheese eating. That in probably an office space wouldn't be accepted anyway. I wouldn't be folding my laundry whilst in the office, and it's not okay to me be folding the laundry and having a difficult conversation. So really think about, what would you be doing in the office, and actually do need to emulate that a little bit. And then in terms of preparation, technology is also key. And we know sometimes when you absolutely critically need it, it's the time that, of course, it falls over. You may want to think about things like headsets. I am not a huge fan, but sometimes that is quite helpful. Having a proper headset actually allows you to focus. You can hear a little bit better. It helps the sound, the background noise is a bit less of a distraction. That sometimes helps people. And if that's your preferred way of working, I would say it's okay to put your headset on and explain to somebody you're speaking to that actually you've got that, so you can hear them a little bit better. Also, things like checking the battery of said headset, preparing for that conversation and making sure that your laptop is charged fully, your headset is charged fully, and making sure that your camera is visible. Now, I appreciate there's been some comments. I can't quite see all of them, and I apologise for that at the moment. The comments around, people being on camera. I think as the HR person delivering the message, you should be on camera, absolutely. For me, I appreciate that not everybody wants to be on camera. Unless they've got a genuine reason not to be, I would ultimately encourage them to do that. But you want to make sure that absolutely your technology is working as best possible. Now, the Wi-Fi will drop out, of course, when you don't want it to. I think there's also being prepared to have those conversations up front with whoever you're talking with to say, look, if my Wi-Fi drops out, I will be back with you. And of course, if yours does, then feel free to dial back into the meeting. And I think it's really just addressing some of these queries and problems up front so that people know what the expectations are. And you would do that potentially if you were in a team meeting, for example, say we're going to break and we're going to have a comfort break and we're going to have a drink at this time. So treat those virtual meetings exactly the same way, and particularly when they're difficult meetings, absolutely, it needs to be treated with the same respect. In terms of these meetings, if we get back to the except it's virtual piece, Alison, sorry.
Yeah.
We have, thank you very much. We have seen, obviously, prior to 2020, we as HR professionals would often be saying, do the difficult conversation face to face. That was what we would encourage. We would probably say, please don't do anything over email or text message or Skype. We'd be saying, get the person in the meeting room and have a conversation and tell them that they're being made redundant or they're being dismissed or there's a performance management issue, as an example. But actually, we have for quite some years now have been developing relationships more virtually. So, Facebook launched golly however many years ago. Dating apps have become much more kind of popular. We've got things like TikTok. I don't use TikTok, apologies. I'm just a little bit too old for that, in my opinion. But we've got things like Instagram, etc. But we have been developing these relationships via technology. And actually, remote connections are being built all the time. And I think particularly things like text have been a huge boom. There is very much this misconception, in my belief, that face-to-face is better. Yes, probably, but actually it can have some positives. And maybe people who have neurodiversity needs, maybe people who are a little bit sort of intimidated by your presence, they may feel actually that the technology is positive. And really what we want to do is adjust our mindset. And I think we all are, and I'm certainly seeing this, but just really adjust our mindsets to allow the possibility that these types of conversations can be done just as effectively through, remote mediums. They aren't without their challenges, as we've had some examples today. But equally, I have certainly seen when I've been doing difficult conversations around investigation and trying to understand what somebody has or hasn't done, actually me not being in the room, I think, is that barrier that allows that other person a little bit of space and scope to be a bit more honest. And sometimes having that physical barrier has been a positive. But I think for us, we really need to ensure that, we're accepting it's something that we are having to use, and then we just know how best to use it these days. Now, we've talked about eye contact, and I appreciate, again, people have said that that's not always possible for individuals, and I wholly understand that. But for me, the eye contact is looking at the screen. Me looking over here, talking to you, is obviously showing that I'm disengaged and I'm not there. So eye contact is difficult via a screen, but looking at the screen is really helpful. And ideally, I have also seen where people start looking at themselves at the bottom of the camera, and they're too focused on what they look like and what their hair looks like, and it's awkward. Yeah, I'm not a big fan of looking at myself on the screen, I'll be honest. But actually look at the screen so that person feels that you're engaging with them and that you're not wandering out. And that really does help too. I also use quite a lot of hand gestures, you'll probably notice. If that's what you do normally, absolutely keep doing that. Probably flailing around all the time is not very helpful, probably a little bit distracting on a virtual meeting. But you can only see yay much of me. You can't see my legs jiggling under the table, etc. But equally, that hand movement is part of the engagement. So that is where we are in terms of virtual meetings. They're here to stay, I think, for the time being, although it's been a bit of a shock to all of us having them to start with. And then in terms of actually in the meeting focus, I cannot really, sort of stress this enough. A major part of a successful remote conversation is about being present, just like you would be in a face-to-face meeting. We all know when somebody's not present in a face-to-face meeting, you can see them, fiddling around with a phone or checking emails. When you're delivering a difficult message, it's absolutely critical to be in that call and not doing anything else, despite the fact now my phone is on silent, I've turned it over, I've put my Teams system that's on a do not disturb. There's nothing else here to distract me. I'm not facing out of the window, so that's behind me. So everyone else can see the lovely view that I've got, but equally I'm not then staring out the window at all the boats that are going past. And making sure that you're in the conversation is really, really important. So for me, if you're delivering a message, you need to be there and being really, really focusing on that and not having any other distractions. The other thing is we talked about having the facts. The other thing is that you're delivering a message, and you need to make sure that you're conveying those messages to your listener as sensitively and as appropriately as possible. We'll talk about some other things around there, but that's what you're doing. The conversation is about delivering the facts and doing the job that you need to. And for me, the basis is try not to stray out of that and focus on what you're there doing. So if we just move on in terms of the facts, I'd also say, taking notes is quite helpful, and telling somebody that's what you're doing. If I was here today sort of in a difficult conversation with Alison, I'll pick on you, I would be saying to Alison, I've got a pen and paper, I'm taking notes here. If I'm looking down, that's what I'm doing. That is a fact of the conversation. And I think it's okay to do that. And I think it's okay to tell people. But again, you would have done some of this thinking in your preparation and just thinking about, what's my screen look like? What have I got in front of me? What's my background look like? How's my audio? All of that would have been done in your planning and your preparation for your meeting. And I think that then allows you a sense of control about what you're doing. And, there will always be things that come in as a slight curveball, but if you've thought about some of these things, hopefully then you feel a bit more secure in what you're doing. The other piece we'd always say is match your tempo of the meeting. Now, technology does make things feel a bit slower, particularly if there's a delay in the sort of the speaking and the reception of the audio. It can feel a little bit jaunty and a bit disconnected. What I would always say is don't rush it. I tend to be a bit of, fast speaker when I get going. Friends would laugh and say I'm a bit of a whirlwind when I'm, chatting, and have a lot of noise and there's a bit of energy. If I'm in a meeting that's a difficult conversation, I slow my voice and I slow my tempo right down. I try to use intonation verbally that is a bit less manic, just so that actually that gives an opportunity of the audio to come between me and that other person, and actually, you know, they can hear me a bit better. And again, you would have thought about this. A sort of tip I always laugh about when I've done training around investigations is try and employ your late night radio voice, so that very slow and mellow voice. It also helps to keep any difficult conversation fairly calm. So if your energy's up here, you're probably going to make the energy of the other person a little bit manic as well. So it's about thinking around, you know, what do you sound like, and practicing that with the colleagues we talked about before is also a good way of doing that. Also give that space to the person who's hearing that message. You've just delivered the fact that maybe they don't have another job in the next few weeks. That's quite a lot of information to be taking on board. And speaking from experience, I have had that, and I've had that where somebody's delivered a message to me, you know, that's not good news. That's a difficult one to digest, and it's a difficult one to digest over a call. So I would always just allow that person a minute to say, I just want to check that, you know, you're okay. And actually go with a, you know, sort of at least a caring human piece, rather than trying to rush through a meeting and rush through a message. Think about actually there's a person at the end of this, and how would you feel if somebody was delivering a difficult message to you? Also, during a meeting, we really want you to think about active listening. Now, people think that, you know, they're listening. Obviously, it's active listening, right? Well, no, active listening is really understanding and playing back just what you've heard. You absolutely cannot be a passive participant in a remote conversation. It's not an option. And particularly when you're having a difficult conversation or giving somebody some difficult news, you really need to be there. You really need to be aware of your body language. While somebody may only see, you know, sort of chest upwards or shoulders upwards, be mindful of what you're doing with your hands, be mindful of where your head is, be mindful about your facial expressions, because obviously that's all they are focusing on in terms of you on their screen. You know, I would be also saying largely try and stay silent if somebody else is explaining their thoughts and feedback. Think about the time that the audio takes to come backwards and forwards. But active listening is really relying on you doing things like rephrasing and paraphrasing back to that person what you have just heard, and repeating back what they've said. And that really allows that person to understand that you're engaged with that. So if I'm talking with Alison and Alison is saying, yeah, but Emma, you know, I've had a really difficult time, and, you know, I've had sick children, and my mum's not been well, and, you know, it's been really difficult to homeschool, then I would be saying, you know, thank you, Alison, for sharing that. I've heard that you've had a really tough time with looking after your dependents, and this has been a really tough time for you. And actually just playing that back shows you and shows that recipient of that message that you have been listening, and you've been understanding what they're communicating to you. The other thing that people do struggle, I think people struggle during difficult conversations anyway, but particularly over virtual conversation or virtual mediums, is to express that empathy. Now, expressing emotions and feelings is a difficult thing. You know, it's something that many of us are uncomfortable with, and I will admit there are times when I've been very uncomfortable with, you know, seeing somebody really upset or really angry, and it's difficult to know how to respond. But actually directly acknowledging somebody's feelings who's maybe just been told, you know, they're being performance managed, as an example, is absolutely powerful and allows that person to feel that they have been understood. Now, I would always say be very careful not to downplay someone's feelings or emotions, you know, whether you're doing it face-to-face or virtually, but particularly when you're doing it virtually. By, you know, naming a sort of a less strong emotion won't de-escalate the situation. In fact, it can often make it a lot worse, because that person then feels that they haven't been heard. So for me, as an example, if somebody's saying, look, you know, I'm juggling my full-time job, and I'm juggling childcare, and I'm trying to work from home, and actually I'm struggling financially, saying something like, yeah, I think I would feel absolutely overwhelmed with that as well, is valid. You're validating their feelings. And I think it's important to remember that if somebody is expressing how they feel, we cannot undermine or take away that feeling. And in these difficult conversations virtually, I would say absolutely acknowledge how somebody is feeling in these meetings and take your time to do that. Again, you're matching their tempo, you're actively listening, you're thinking about what they've said, you're engaging in terms of your facial expressions and those movements. That's really important.
I think that's Emma, that's links so nicely to some of the texts that people have had. They've said on the chat, about, well, the camera's a bit subjective, and should we have should we make it company policy? I mean, this leads, I think some of you were on the call last week that we did, which was about understanding depression. So I think it's great that we can try and ask people to put the camera on and how they're feeling, but a lot of people apparently, who have more mental health issues are less likely to feel comfortable, as an example, to put on the camera.
Yep.
So I think those micro communications that you're talking about are so important. That's why the preparation and making sure that they've got the link in advance, and different things are so important. So just answering the chat before I hand back over to you. And we haven't got too much longer,
right.
But answering chat that somebody said, can you listen to other webinars? Yes, you can. We'll be sending you a link afterwards. Sandra says, I'd love some advice on something. We typically let people know that their roles are at risk and then announce to all staff that a restructure has been proposed. In order to get through everyone quickly, we allow 15 minutes literally to notify only, and the letter explains the short meeting to get through to everyone as quickly as we can in one day. Does anyone feel this time is too short, about to go and do a large restructure? Do you mean the 15-minute meeting is too short, or the time frame between?
So this is the first time I'm going to do restructure virtually. I've not done one before. I've done disciplinaries and dismissals and things, but this is the first time it's going to be a restructure. It's going to really impact people that have been with the business a long time. I know people are going to be upset. I've also got to do it with a US person, so I can't start till 2:00. So typically, because there are so many people, we allow 15 minutes per person, get 3 people, and then let the larger organization know this is about to happen, to stop gossip and stop people speculating. I know in the past 15 minutes has been short to get through it, and I just wonder if I'm making a big mistake allowing that time for it virtually. Should I? But the problem is then it gets later and later in the day, and trying to get everyone.
My advice would be 15 minutes is not a long time. Probably won't take you much more than 15 minutes on reality, but I think you're going to find that some people will be fine about it and be like, okay, they'll get through it. I think 15 minutes isn't very long. I think 30 minutes would be, or 25 minutes would be a bit more respectful. And I would also say those sort of very quick fire conversations are fine if people know this is coming. It's also fine if people have got support networks, and that's another thing I would also, if you're going to give 15 minutes somebody a bit of a sort of shock tactic, have they then got somebody at home to speak to, or if they've got a support network to deal with? You've got to cover quite a lot in 15 minutes. And actually, part of having a conversation is the little bit of rapport that you want to build with that person. And you'll have some people that will be fine about 15 minutes, and there'll be other people who just, it depends on how many you need to do and how quickly you need to do it.
I've asked Sian I've put Sian on the spotlight. Sian's one of our HR employee relations people. I know you've done some programs, haven't you, remotely?
Yes, I've done some reorganisations remotely last summer, and they were larger scale, and so therefore we had collective consultation first, so it wasn't a shock. They'd already heard about it via their employee reps, and even then, although some did take 15 minutes, some of them took longer than that, so we allowed half an hour, and that allowed some people yes, I've heard about it and I don't have any questions, but that was because they'd already heard from the collective consultation process. Others really, as I'm sure all of us find, wanted the opportunity to have a vent, and I didn't want to cut short that. I'm really cross, this organisation doesn't know what they're doing, all this sort of anger that's come out of being told that their job was at risk. And I allowed half an hour, and it did mean that I was absolutely exhausted because I just couldn't get breaks into my day to get as many done as possible. But there's no way I would have wanted to cut short that sort of anger and upset and that sort of thing. And that's just my take on it. So I would allow half an hour, and that gives you if you have shorter ones, that gives you a bit of time to sometimes bring people forward. Sometimes you can do that if they are going really quickly. You can sometimes get in touch with people to say, would you like your meeting to be moved forward? And that might mean that you get through more than you expected. But I think 15 minutes is not enough, especially if there hasn't already been some sort of communications gone out via employee reps.
Yeah, there won't be. So I think I'm just concerned about the meetings going on till 8 or 9 o'clock at night. So I think what we'll have to do is then we'll have to do them over 2 separate days.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, we won't be able to make any large announcements until the following day. But the reason I'm always really hesitant to do that is because that means that you could be next and you're waiting. So, Sian tells Alison, oh, I've just been told this. And then Alison spends all night worrying, is she next? And she's not going to know. And that's why we've always tried.
Yeah, no, I do as well. Yes.
I'm gonna have to move on. Press on.
Yes, thank you, everyone.
No problem, Sandra. If you want to stay at the end, of course, we can answer any questions. So I'm just going to go back to sharing here, and carry on. We've got about 5 more minutes.
Yeah, no problem, I will do that. So in terms of, just to finish off a quick bit about active listening, I also would say it's okay to take a break. If you're watching somebody, they get teary, they need time to go and get a pause, a drink, a tissue, let them. These are human beings that you are talking with. So I would always say, remember that, we've got to do a job, absolutely, but give them that space to go and have a moment if you need be. And you can say, oh, we'll just stop the video, stop the audio, come back, we'll have a 5-minute break. Don't forget, it's okay to do that even in a virtual call. And then in terms of closing a meeting, I would always say that this is something that can often be overlooked, particularly in a sort of virtual meeting, because people sort of forget that, there's still this meeting etiquette we have to follow. It's just that we're doing it over a video. At the end of a meeting, you were doing face-to-face, you would probably just wrap up. You would talk about what the next steps are. You would agree the next meeting date or time. You'll talk about what you've got planned. Close the conversations that you're having virtually in the same manner. Not every conversation will have to have an action or a next step necessarily, and that's okay. But you, as if you're leading a meeting, you may want to do a little bit of a summary to say what you've discussed and what you've talked about. And you also want to sort of maybe affirm and validate what the content has been. So, for example, if you've had a difficult conversation about performance, you may want to say, well, we've heard your concerns. Thank you for sharing those, mitigating circumstances, and thank them for their time and their patience. But it is often a very common pitfall that people don't conclude meetings as they would do normally. So for us, conversations that are difficult anyway. But I would say follow up, make sure that person is okay. Make sure that you've checked in with them afterwards. And Sandra, obviously talking about your very quick fire meetings, there may be some people that have, require more follow up than others. But yes, 2020 for all of us has thrown a massive curveball about how we, deal with these things, and it's added a huge, addition and layers of complexity that we weren't aware of before. We weren't probably ready to face. But effectively, if you think about these conversations, take some time to prepare them, really think about what you need to do during those meetings and try and treat them, as practically as possible. Hopefully, these will not be different to the in-person engagement that we've been so very used to. And actually, you can use these virtual meetings with appropriate planning and some of the techniques that we talked about, so that they are no less meaningful and no less effective than face-to-face meetings have been. And I think that, so Alison's popped up a couple of key phrases that I think would be really helpful to use. These are things I would probably adopt and use in calls and conversations. But it is about remembering, very much that there's a human being still at the end of the call. And the other thing I would also say is, if you've had a few tough conversations, you're delivering message about redundancies, restructures, performance management, disciplinaries, dismissals, whatever that be, who's looking after you and who have you got to go and talk to? So who is providing that support? If you're out of your comfort zone, for example. And I'll hand back over to Alison in terms of next steps in the rest of the webinar.
Oh, listen, amazing. Jeez, you're a natural at this, Emma. Right, we'll be booking. We'll be booking you in for another one. And I've also got Kathy Kirk. I reckon she'd be a good one to get to do. Don't you reckon? Sean's going to do some more. Sean's on the 7th of the 7th. Sean's running a session for us. So, I mean, yeah, so we've made sure that, you know, you want to make sure that other senior managers are involved and make sure that you're available. And if you're out of your comfort zone, that you get yourself some support and webinars and training, and obviously People Vision can help you with that. So today we helped you you know, think about how you can inform your employees of any changes, convey some success, some sincerity, not easy to say, ensure that all parties can communicate effectively and be heard, and leave this session hopefully better prepared. So some useful resources, you'll get this. We found this little thing out on the CIPD website, actually. Sometimes you wonder whether paying for your CIPD membership's worth it. I don't know if anyone else on the call wonders, but I am going to do it. I keep saying I won't, and then I do, because you get little resources like this, which is top 10 tips. We'll be sending that out to you.